Hello, my name is Jen, and I'd like to welcome you all back to part two of Thoughts and Thinking Traps. As I said, my name is Jen, and I guide and support people on the online Silver Cloud platform, helping them to learn CBT skills to use in everyday life. This week's presentation is a continuation of week 13, Thoughts and Thinking Traps, part one. I did set you some simple exercises to do, so you will need to tune into part one first if you haven't already done so. I spoke about thoughts and thinking traps, the latter being very easy to fall into. If you recall, one of those was about labelling and negative self-talk. An example I used was, you burn the dinner and you say, I'm a useless cook. And you're already labelling yourself as useless without even stopping to consider all the lovely meals you have cooked in the past. This is when the negatives override the positives. I asked you to start observing yourself to see if and how often you do this negative self-talk, as we often do it without realizing it. But once highlighted, you may become more aware. And if you did notice this was something you do, please feedback in the comment box below, even if it's just a yes or a no. I also gave you a scenario and asked you to hypothetically put yourself in the situation explained and complete the TFB cycle, that's thoughts, feelings and behaviours, in relation to this scenario to help you gain an understanding of how the TFB cycle is driven. Remember, the basic concept of CBT is how we think about something affects the way we feel mentally and physically, and that in turn impacts on our behaviour. Now we are going to look at two reactions to the scenario I gave you last week and asked you to complete the TFB cycle in relation to this and to identify any thinking traps that you fell into. So just to remind you of the TFB cycle, Becca is going to put it on the screen. As you can see before you, you have the TFB cycle, and on the left we have the trigger, and at the top we have the thoughts after that trigger has happened. And on the right we have the feeling moods, that's what we feel, and we score those from 1 to 10, 10 being the most intense. At the bottom we have any physical symptoms that we may experience, and on the left we have how we behave in reaction to the event. Thank you, Becca. Right, now what I'm going to do now, I'm going to just recap briefly on the scenario. So I was walking down the road and I saw my friend on the other side of the road and I shouted, "Hiya, Mary," and she ignored me. So I assumed that she hadn't heard me. So I shouted, "Hiya, Mary," again, and she snubbed me again. Now, a very common reaction to this scenario is my thoughts, oh, I must have done something to upset her. And I assumed she had snubbed me on purpose. Note, first and second thinking trap, jumping to conclusions and making assumptions. Following this incident, I walked home. And by the time I'd got home, my TFB cycle had gone into complete overdrive. And my thoughts had become so distorted that I started to catastrophize, third thinking trap, and began to think about a misunderstanding we had months ago and wondered if it was anything to do with the way she was behaving, even though we had sorted it out at the time. I was now guilty of making a mountain out of a molehill. My feelings, I was hurt, sad and confused by her actions, and on a scale to 1 to 10, the intensity of my emotions was 9. Physically, I felt empty, as I thought I had lost a good friend, and my behaviour and my appetite were affected by this incident. My behaviour in reaction to this, previously I used to ring my friend 2 to 3 times a week, but I immediately stopped doing this, as I thought and really believed that she had deliberately snubbed me. My feelings and belief in this was so strong that I was guilty of the fourth thinking trap emotional reasoning. This is when we perceive the situation based on our emotions, that is what we feel, to be true despite the lack of facts or evidence. So, because I thought my friend had deliberately ignored me, that's what I believed. The thoughts I experienced with regard to this scenario in CBT are known as hot thoughts. That is when they trigger negative emotions, and it is important to learn how to spot and challenge these thoughts. Once we spot a hot thought, it does get easy with practice. We need to challenge it and change the way we think and come up with an alternative way of thinking which is more balanced and helpful. Basically, an alternative thought is another way of interpreting or thinking about a situation. Now I have identified the thinking traps that I fell into. I'm going to further challenge my thought in relation to this scenario. When my friend snubbed me, instead of jumping to conclusions and making assumptions, I should have looked for the evidence to back up the thought I was having. That is, that snubbing me was a deliberate action, and that I must have done something to upset her. There was no evidence to back this up, as last time we spoke, everything was fine. We talked, we laughed, and we even started planning our summer holiday. So I need to ask myself, is what I'm thinking the only explanation? Possibly not. Do I have all the facts? No. Have I considered both sides of the story? No. So my feelings and my behaviour were all based on my emotions. That is what I felt, which was so strong that I perceived them to be true. I had not taken into account both sides of the story or gathered any evidence to support my thoughts, and I did not have all the facts. I was also guilty of falling into four thinking traps: jumping to conclusions, making assumptions, catastrophizing, emotional reasoning, all of which lead to negative emotions. A little tip for you all: in situations like this, it's always a good idea to ask yourself, what would I tell a friend if they were in my situation? This helps us to take a more objective view. So I need to come up with a more alternative, balanced way of thinking and dealing with the scenario, and this would be to change my reaction to the event. For example, on being snubbed, my thoughts, that's out of character for my friend. I hope she's okay. I wonder if something has happened that I'm unaware of. Is there a logical explanation? My feelings, I would be worried and concerned for her, as her behaviour was out of character. Intensity of these feelings were 4 out of 10. And physically, I felt a little on edge, as my friend's behaviour was out of character and I could not settle. My behaviour was to ring her and see if she was okay. So I rang my friend, and she was really pleased to hear from me. I asked her if everything was okay, and she revealed she had just received some really bad news and didn't know which way to turn and desperately needed a shoulder to cry on. I mentioned I saw her in the street earlier. She had no recollection of it, and as she was most probably lost in thought, and apologised for her actions. So one scenario, two different reactions. Before challenging thoughts, I was guilty of thinking traps, and my thoughts and actions were ruled by my actions. And the outcome was lack of communication, and in the long term, possibly loss of a good friend. After challenging my thoughts, I had zero thinking traps, and thoughts and actions were based on factual evidence and finding out the reasons that contributed to my friend's behaviour. The outcome: friendship was maintained, and I was able to help my friend through a trying and challenging time. So before challenging thoughts, my intensity of my emotions was 9 out of 10. And after challenging my thoughts, the intensity of my emotions was 4 out of 10. Note that the intensity of emotions had reduced more than 50%. Hence, these examples clearly show the value of spotting and challenging your thoughts and the effects on our emotions, behaviour, and the final outcome. So, if you completed the scenario given in broadcast week 13, I would like you to look at it and identify your thinking traps, challenge your thoughts, collate the evidence to do this, then compare the rate and intensity of your emotions, moods, and feelings on a scale 1 to 10 before and after challenging your thoughts. Is there a difference? So that's all on thoughts and thinking traps, spotting and challenging thoughts. So next time you have a hot thought, remember to spot it, challenge it, identify any thinking traps you may have fallen into, and come up with a more alternative, balanced thought by collating all the evidence. The more you practice this, the easier it will become. And once you've grasped this skill, you will automatically spot and challenge your thoughts as they arise. That's all for now. So thank you for tuning in. If you're interested in finding more about the Silver Cloud program, please get in touch. The number's on the bottom of the screen. So all I need to say now is have a lovely day and stay safe, and thank you very much. Bye bye.